Hello future tech leaders, I am Sindhuja. Based on my own experience, I know that learning the right skills can shape our future. What if I say learning was as thrilled as the tech world itself? There we go. A cloud foundation, that's exactly what you will experience. From day one, you will be immersed in the interactive sessions and expert-led courses that covers most of the widely used technologies in the zone of data science to cloud computing, which brings more light to the life of a techie. I'm so excited to help you and unlock the true potential of a technology. Well, then why to wait? Let's see what it unfolds.
Next, remember that you see over. Here is your age-old mechanism of saving contents using our DBMS solutions where we have SQL database. Now once it comes to Microsoft Azure provides multiple options for SQL databases. One way that we can use over here is we can create something as PaaS service, right? Or we can use a virtual machine. There are two extremes that you see one place. You don't have to manage anything. One place. I don't have to manage anything. Everything is managed by Microsoft. Whereas on the other side, we have everything to manage ourselves. Depending upon what is the kind of team members that you have. What is the experience and expertise on SQL database that you have? Do you have a DVA with you? Right. Keeping those kind of aspects in mind, we can decide whether to go for SQL database as a service. Whereas on other hand, you can go for SQL database within a VM. Now another member over here, once it comes to management of SQL databases, is how much connectivity. Sorry, how do I put it? If you have a lot of complex queries to write, lot of administrative activities you want to involve over here. If the size of data is pretty huge, the number of transactions that you're creating is much higher, right? In those scenarios, it is recommended to go for a VA. For normal scenarios where you don't want too much deep dive into the database. You want to create tables, databases, and within a particular limit. The size of data also is not very huge. In those scenarios, it is recommended to go for platform as a service. Use SQL databases as service as a service rather than creating a virtual machine for it. As far as module, what we're going to discuss about quickly is about two options. VMs we're not discussing here because by now we know how to create virtual machine. We know how to assign licenses in terms of managed license, in terms of software assurance, and if you already have a license of SQL Server, you can migrate the license to your environment. Right, that option is available to you. Two things that we're going to discuss about is database settings for a SQL Server environment. SQL database as a service. And then we'll discuss about one more option given by Microsoft, which is intermediate between VM and PaaS service, which is called as managed instances. SQL database managed instances. If you look at your SQL database settings, there are three things that we have as an option. Second, where we have SQL Server within vMySQL managed instance. And third is your logical server. If you look at the PaaS service, this is what we are mentioning about to SQL database logical server. Now, even here you have two options. One is a single instance, one database, one server, right? Second is Elastic Pool. Within Elastic Pool, what we are doing is we are creating a server, and while creating a server itself, we are specifying pool of resources. When I say pool of resources, I'm not sure how many customer requests will be coming, right? Or how many the number of databases which I have created. Which database will have, say, millions of records, which database may have thousands of records. I'm not sure on that area. In those scenarios, what I can do is I can create something called as Elastic Pool. Depending upon the application need, it can take up the required resources from the pool. Right. It is more elastic in nature, more scalable in nature as compared to a single database. From my experience, I would recommend go for Elastic Pool. Whenever you are looking at multi-tenant data sources, multi-tenant kind of deployments. A second resource that you have over here is your SQL server in a VLAN, which I already mentioned about. The third option that you see is SQL managed instance. Now this is where Microsoft creates this complete environment. And here when you're looking at Microsoft is giving you a cluster, right? This is basically a database cluster. And using this database cluster, you can create your resources that you would want. And it will help you manage these resources and whatever. Remember we mentioned about size of data, any specific permissions or any specific solution that you want from SQL Server. You can do this here. Exactly same thing you can do over here. And this will be within a virtual network that you would want to create. Associate with your VMs, other application virtual machines directly with this. Let's take a look at Azure. If you look at the solution over here, what it allows you create primarily is two members. One is SQL Server and second is here. If you see, you'll have to specify the server details over here. What is the server name? Whatever server name you want. What is the admin login and password you want to mention? What is the location you want for the server? Now on that server, what is the database that you want to create? Right. If you want to use an Elastic Pool, you can create it from here. What is the limit that you would want? And here the pricing price that you pay is for the pool. Or else you want to go for a single database. While we are configuring this now, please be careful. I understand once it comes to databases or any data storage as a resource here. There are two things that are required. One is compute and second storage. Now this we may not have discussed explicitly once it comes to Cosmos DB. But actually it is true in both the cases. Apart from your unstructured data storage, which is storage account, where you don't have anything to pay for processing. The processing is done by the client-side application. Right. Storage account will only do the storage part of it. Whereas if you look at Cosmos DB has read units per second, which is the processing unit over there. It charges you for processing. Apart from that, it will also charge you for amount of data that you have stored. In terms of SQL Server, here also you have the same thing. You will be charged for storage, the amount of data that you have stored. And second is the computational power that you need. If you look at the configuration over here, within database, there are two primary models from the top level. If you see, there are two primary models. One is DTU's database transaction units, which is the unit for processing over here. Based on your requirements, you can either go for basic or dev test kind of workloads, or standard for web traffic, or premium, depending upon how much of storage you want. You cannot go beyond 1 TB of data storage over here. That will be the limit. In terms of processing power that you require, right? You can increase or decrease the processing power that you need to. And with maximum number of TTUs, which is TTUs. And max you can have is 4 TB of data storage. Right. Within this fast service premium workloads. Now, the common question people ask is, Subhash, how do we go ahead? Extend these services beyond this limit. Right. The only answer for that is, I'm sorry, this service will not support you beyond 4 TB. Please go for either you take a backup of the old data. Are you saying this 4 TB is active data? We can see a re-architecting solution over here. You go for a virtual machine because this will not support beyond. Secondly, how do you calculate the DTU? How do you know that what amount of DTUs one needs to configure over here? For configuring this DTU, arriving to a conclusion. How much of DTUs is required? You have to check for database profiling. Check for performance requirement. See how much is the input-output happening. You'll have to check for and you'll have to scan the complete on-premises environment or wherever you have your database already there to help you with the values of it. This is the older approach. The new approach that you have, which I like the most, as compared to the previous one, is going for a vCore approach. As far as vCore is concerned, how many core? See, I'm not asking you to create a VM, but even in terms of app services, We don't create a vman, right? Even there, you have an option of choosing an app service. And you said, this is approximately the type of machine that I will require. This is the number of core which I want for processing. Same thing you can do here as well. If you have your on-premises environment, you can take few cues from there, saying that if this is the current machine setup which I have locally, I can take the estimate and create a resource from cloud as well. If you see, you have options of sorry, we have options of provision resource, and we have a serverless compute as well. We have options of what type of machine do you want to use over here. If you see maximum storage, it goes up to 4 TB. Maximum memory, how much you can store in terms of RAM, and what is the core processing that you want. Right. If you see the limits over here, it remains the same. But once it comes to calculation, this becomes much more easier when we are going for decode-based model. If you see the pricing on right hand side, it is entirely based on the compute power that you would want for your database. And second is how much data you are storing. In terms of serverless compute, here we are saying, depending upon how much of requests that we are getting, how much processing is required, it will automatically create the resources behind the scene. And once the job is done, it will go and remove those resources. It will not charge me if I am not using any. For the details over here, but once it comes to serverless, you have to mention how many maximum cores and how many minimum cores you want to configure over here. Now the initial phases of the application, where you are not sure how much of compute is required. In those scenarios, I would recommend go serverless. And once you know this is a range, lower range and higher range. In terms of peak scenario, this is how much the consumption is. Compute consumption in lower range. This is how much is the compute consumption. Once you have that idea, then you can go for provision compute resources, because now you know how much is required. Similarly, how we add basic and other options there. Similarly, you have options for hyperscale over here. Right. When you are going for hyperscale, here you can mention what is the number of replicas that you want. This is more in terms of horizontal scaling. Right. How many replicas of machines do you want? This will help you create more number of instances and allow you save more data over here. Same thing holds true in terms of virtual cores as well. Here you can specify what kind of machine do you want in terms of RAM over here, and what is the size of data you want to store. Great. Any questions over here? In our case, we will do general purpose. We will go for serverless right now. Let's click on as backup storage. Replication is concerned. Let me go for. While I was discussing, I see we can specify managed instance as part of your virtual enterprise network. Similar kind of facility is now available for PaaS services as well. We can create a public endpoint, private endpoint, where we can mention that this resource will be accessible only within a given virtual network. I can do that over here. From security perspective, I'll cover this part a bit later. Right. You can enable Azure Defender for school, checking for attacks like checking for attack on your web application, SQL injection, those kind of things you can avoid on the database level. Right. We can create sample database over here. Adventure works. If you already have back file or you have a back, you can restore it over here as well. How do you? Or you also go for data migration. As you move further, we will also discuss in length what are options migration or data migration over here. While this database is getting created, membership I mentioned of managed instance. In the of managed instance, if you look at the options, this is basically an intermediate between right. This is not fully managed by Microsoft, fully in sense. There are some which is given access to the admin team. Have some of the approve options open to you, where you can go and specify the changes over there. Things like VNet implementation, creation of private, associating a private IP address with your machine instances. Those things which are not possible. SQL database, SAP service. Those things we can do. What is the advantage that we have? Easy migration to your environment. Because any resource that you have, please don't get me wrong, because I'm not sure how many of you all know SQL Server. You have services like those things will not work in managers full-fledged SQL instance, which means from a database service perspective, those aspects will work as it is. No challenge with that as far as BI services are concerned. For BI services, Microsoft is already giving a separate set of services. Targeted towards BI solutions. Those things we don't get as part of managed instance. I making myself in terms of mechanisms that trading the infrastructure, managing the high availability, that environment behind the scene. Something that your VBS were doing for always on cluster, right? All those things are taken care by Microsoft. Some of these sites are very critical to help you differentiate between both these members. If you look at managed instance, it gives you benefit of past services. Meanwhile, it also helps you business continuity. For I don't think why they have mentioned because once we are going to Azure environment or a cloud environment, we don't do any hardware purchasing over there as well, right? Which is a case in terms of premises, environment. Third point, I would agree to quick provisioning. Your scaling up of services, creating more instances that you would want, going beyond the limits of that we had. Those things we can do over here. You can add or manage over here. Those things you can do over here. Remember, I said, if you have requirement for TB, what to do? This could be a solution. That problem. Right. In terms of back point in time, some of these things, if you look at database instance, this is what I was mentioning about. Patching is concerned. If you see the options of patching over here, those things are taken care by Microsoft. Any required dates, SQL database, engine, moving from the prior version to a newer version. All these things are taken care by Microsoft, which generally we had to do. Database administrator or a VM administrator. These facilities are already being given to you. If you look at high availability in terms of SQL database, what Microsoft these load as a user when we connect to it. will help us work better. Right. You have differentiation in terms of compute resources, storage resources. Now looking at an application need, whether or a number of requests which are coming, wherever it needs more compute, already has pull behind the scenes pre-provision. It will allocate resources from that pool. Similarly, in terms of storage, members over here from storage perspective as in terms of high availability resources. This is applicable for premium and business critical services. Right. If you see the options, it will create group of over here behind the scene. Now this UCSS. In terms of storage account, that's your choice. You will decide whether you want to go for Azure or no. In terms of Cosmos, it by default goes for SSD. Give the S RAID units per second. In this scenario, are being used extensively. So, premium in business tier. If you look at your hyperscale environment, this is a much complex architecture, making sure we already have snapshots for it because now we are talking about much higher up for the data. If you see the architecture over here, you have basic compute solutions. Paging happen behind the scene to make sure you have all that data available. Along with that, Microsoft also uses in-memory data storage using Redis cache over here that you see. This basically represents Redis cache. Right. Now the reason for creating all these resources over here to make sure we have faster responses being given to the customer. Hyperscale perspective. Geographical Redis cache perspective. We already know availability zones. Right? If you see each of these control rings which were there as single instance, one control ring within a region. Now you have of them over here and each of them are in separate availability zones. Each of them are in separate availability zone, which means in a worst case situation, at least one of these control rings or one of the setup will be available. Compute perspective, data storage. We already mentioned about that over here. This architecture, you ensure highest uptime and highest SLA for your service. That's all in terms of concept. Let's go back to our database once again from a database perspective. If you look at the options that we chose, compute and store, from developers' perspective, what they would require would be user connection strings over here and they can work with it. Along with this, if you want to go for right now, we have gone for if you want to go for a replication, we can do that. A kind of backup restore of your current data without going to SQL Server Management Studio. If you want to work with resources over here, you can log into your. We already have taken a custom. In our case, we have already taken up existing theme assigned a sample database. You see all the resources from there that you are available to. One more thing that we have while creation of this resource, while creation of the my database, watched. We have already set a server firewall. Where did I do that? When I said allow my current system to be added over here, it has already added a IP address of my local system. And that's how it is, allowing me to access it, right? And in real world scenarios as well, we would not have users directly connecting to database. They will connect via applications. If you have to connect via applications, make use of connection string and work with it. If anybody wants to directly access database from the portal or from Management Studio, they should go ahead and do it through a server firewall. They have to add that system or add that machine over here. Apart from this, other aspects which I will compute later. In terms of security, how you can do data discovery and classification. If you look at the options here, if you select the relevant columns over here, you can specify what are the confidentiality that you would want over here. Some of these things it has already. If you have to change these values, you say this is not that confidential. I know my data very well. You can modify these values as well. Now some of these things earlier we were doing by going inside the SQL server. These values in terms of security, management, all these things are available out of the box, whatever your DBA was doing. And there are things beyond that as well. You can see all these things are directly available to you on the portal. In terms of performance tuning, automatic tuning of resources, any kind of recommendations, all these things will be mentioned over here. This is a core advantage of using L database as service. And these are the options available here. Anyone, any questions here with SQL database? It's a pretty simple, straightforward creation, right? Is there any? Pretty straightforward. Pretty straightforward. Is there any certain things which we have to look into it? Which know which is crucial in this. You just need to get this information from the customer. Study their existing environment. How much data they want to save. Right. What is the kind of queries they get per day or in a week? Are there any spike scenarios that they have? Those kind of inputs that we need to have, which will help us decide what kind of resource will be better for them, whether they should go for manage instance. Please be careful. Manage instance is very expensive. If there is, I would say, basic scenarios or even web traffic for that matter, it's good to go for a service. That's my suggestion. And most of the cases I have seen people going for as service option, Disco database, or going for virtual machines, depending upon existing storage requirements, primarily not from a compute perspective, but from a storage perspective. Does it answer the question? Let's move ahead. And finally, do not forget to like, share and subscribe to our channel.